You're listening in on an animated discussion about the new Batman adventures with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from the Cinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Animal Act. All right, Joshua, I'm just going to start this off the top. My biggest takeaway from this episode is that every time I see the circus in popular media, and it's not just this episode, it's all sorts of things, like including The Greatest Showman. Circuses are bad and they're a thing of the past. Why are they? It's really weird how obsessed we were with them for almost 100 years. Anyway, that's my note. Animals are great. Don't you love animals? I love animals. I don't know if this episode loves animals. Joshua, tell me about the animals.
Well, they're in a circus, so right away they're not as loved as they could be, because I think you're onto something. And it is like, I feel like there must be a book, like an anthropological book or something, that explains our bizarre fascination with the horror show that is circuses for, you're right, like 100 years. It's wild. Okay. Yeah, this episode, not fantastic. And we're on a bit of a run of those, right? Well, with new Batman adventures, we've had some good ones pop up, but we're on a bit of a dry run. I do think it's interesting that this comes so hot on the heels of Critters, that another animal-centric episode happens. I do think that it's sad, honestly, that this one is nowhere near as interesting. Like, Critters isn't good, right? But we at least got giddy about how weird it was. This one has kind of the backbone of a good idea, but it actually has the backbone of 2 or 3 good ideas. And it winds up just kind of coming together in something that's okay at best.
You know, it's a ham sandwich that's got some really good mayo, and maybe it's even got some good quality ham. Maybe if you like mustard, it's some good mustard. So the ingredients are there. But at the end of the day, you're like, it's a ham sandwich.
Maybe it didn't even make it to the sandwich level. Like, maybe everybody just got the stuff out and it's on the counter and it's near each other and you can see that it could be a ham sandwich, but nobody's actually come in and put it actually together as a ham sandwich yet.
And they look at it and they say, you know what? I don't care about ham sandwiches today.
They just, oh, that's it. That's perfect. They got about halfway through it and then just walked away. I changed my mind. So, okay, we've tipped our hands there. It's not a great episode. Let's talk about our couple of designs. This is our first opportunity to really talk about the Mad Hatter. Caleb, how do you feel about the new Batman Adventures version of the Mad Hatter?
I think he's a notable improvement over the original design. This is one of the ones that I think was, personally, I think was a level up. My opinion. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I like it because it highlights I would say the features of the character that were already there. His very triangular sort of jaw that we had seen a little bit of in the original design.
Yeah.
They amp that up. The simplification of the color palette works pretty well with him. And also they just make him look way more like an incel than he already did. And I think so I think it more accurately represents what I think of as the Mad Hatter. So for me, it's a level up. Is it like an amazing design? Probably not. I just think it's a better version of the Mad Hatter.
No, I'll buy that. I'm with all of that. I do think that they make him quite a lot more sinister, whereas before he was like kind of a goofy guy trying to be scary, and this is a guy who is actually scary. As you say, they do mute his color palette quite a bit. He went from kind of like blues and greens to this much more like, I don't know, hunter green and kind of like a dark brown, so he's just more sinister in that way. They kept his kind of like oversized overbite, but it only shows up when he smiles, right? So he can look like just kind of an odd guy, but then when he smiles, it's like, oh my gosh, you're terrifying. And that smile combines with these sunken eyes that they give him, so that when he smiles, he's much scarier. Like, I feel like they went a little too hard towards whimsy in the first take for BTAS. And here they're like, no. We need children to be frightened of the Mad Hatter. Let's do it. And they do it. It's actually a really good design. I mean, I think we're only hedging because it's not the biggest level up from BTAS to NBA. But it's still good. It's very good.
Well, is it just me, too? They also make him look older, which adds to the creep factor a little bit. Like, I think in the original design, obviously he was going after younger women, which, again, is very creepy. But his age, he didn't seem like as old, you know? Maybe he was a guy in his 30s or whatever. This looks like a guy in his 50s. Maybe it's just my imagination, or maybe he just hasn't gotten very much sunlight, but his skin, it's paler. It just looks, it looks, again, the sunken eyes, like you highlight, all the things add up to a much creepier looking dude.
They did away with a lot of the facial wrinkles that they had on BTAS because everybody got more simplified, right? Sometimes for the worse, but usually for the better. You know, we've talked about it. That's what we're doing. It's most of the time it turns out better, or at least as a lateral move, right? In this case, they remove those facial wrinkles, but between the sunken eyes, the sallow skin, and the bigger ears, which, you know, like that's kind of a signifier of men who are getting quite a bit up there in years. For whatever reason, the ears seem to become more pronounced, you know? And I think you're right. He does just come across as a much older as well as more sinister character. The only other thing that I really wanted to bring out as far as the Mad Hatter in this episode is how impressed I was with the disguise they put on him. Personally, because I am close watching this show, right? I grokked pretty quickly that the clown was the Mad Hatter. Not because I knew the Mad Hatter was in this episode, but because they did a fantastic job of drawing the Mad Hatter only in disguise. You know, they didn't fake us out. That's amazing.
Yeah, I actually was very impressed because... So when I was watching this, I don't know if I had seen this episode before. Maybe I had, maybe I hadn't. I don't remember this episode. So I'm watching it, and I'm like, that clown looks really familiar. I can't put my finger on him, but I know I've seen that. He just seems like because it's the Mad Hatter, because we have seen the Mad Hatter before. So I just say kudos to them. Really, really great disguise, making me question whether or not like I was crazy or off, maybe a better way to put it, when trying to identify the character. I was like, are they just, I almost assumed they were just lazy and were recycling character models. That's how good it was.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I have complained on this podcast as well as many other podcasts that lazy reveals where you have to lie to your audience are the worst. Like, you are a hack if you have to do that. And so I remain extremely impressed that this group of creators didn't lie to us for a second. They put clown makeup and put him in a clown outfit, but otherwise that guy is the Mad Hatter, and it is obvious if you're looking. That's a good, strong reveal. A++. Okay, I think we have one other design that we should probably at least mention because she's kind of a big deal for this episode. Miranda Kane.
Miranda Kane.
Caleb, do you have anything nice to say about Miranda Kane? Because I got plenty not nice to say.
Nice, not about the design. No, not really. Not about the character design. I again, it's kind of like the ham sandwich nothing burger approach. I'm just like, okay, it's a sexy circus girl who has animal friends. was kind of my take. Again, we just talked about this in our last episode, but boy howdy, so many sexy women on this show, which, you know, it is what it is. It's just kind of consecutively, you're like, sheesh, I don't know if this was necessary, but hey, here we are.
Honestly, comparing her to Mixie's girlfriend on Mixel Pixelated is pretty good, actually, because Miranda's actually important to this story. We could not have the story that we were given if we just cut Miranda. Unlike if we cut Mixie's girlfriend, nothing changes in that episode, right? Miranda's actually important. And yet, even though she is vitally important to the plot, clearly is a competent person who is a professional at training animals, but we still have to put her in a midriff bearing top and super tight jodhpurs. And the nod that I will at least give to Mixie's girlfriend is at least the outfits they put her in were really creative, right? It was just, let's do a round robin of pinup girl stuff. And Miranda is sexy in the most boring way. Like, it's the default for sexiness. We talked about this in Cult of the Cat when the lieutenant, who is a woman, comes out of the ninja outfit and all of a sudden, here's her midriff. Now look, I'm pro midriff. I'm all about that midriff life. If you can pull it off, Godspeed to you. But as far as the creators of the show, it's just the laziest signpost saying, she's hot, look. And I'm just like, guys, do better. Honestly, do better. She's important to the episode. She's on screen a lot. Do better than this. Not just in terms of sexism, but also just in terms of a better design for her.
Right. Joshua, and I think we've talked about this before, so again, do not want to continue to beat dead horses, but I really feel like we're in a stretch, and I know I know with confidence that we have some really strong episodes of the new Batman Adventures coming before the series concludes, but I gotta say, we're in this like middle section where it just feels like they're taking a lot of shortcuts, and it's just, and one of them is in some of these character designs for the women.
No, I think you're right. And something that you and I have read a little bit about, but haven't been able to confirm like really seriously, is that they didn't intend to be doing both of these shows at the same time. And I think they came back to Batman after starting Superman. And so you wind up with like Superman sort of doesn't always have the best designs either, but it's better than this most of the time. And it feels like Superman's maybe getting like 60-70% of the energy, and New Batman Adventures is getting whatever they have left over. And I feel like we see that in both the writing and the designs. Anyway, let's talk about the good parts of this episode, because there's some really interesting interpersonal scenes going on.
So, and I know, Joshua, one of the big things for you, I mean, you are a huge fan of the family dynamic of the Bat family, and I actually feel like we get some good Bat family energy in this episode that has, despite kind of being on the label for this series as part of the promise, they actually haven't done a lot of or at least not done a lot of very well. This episode gets it. We got Batman and Dick as the estranged son and father relationship. We got the big brother, little brother energy with both Dick and Tim. Like the synergy is there, and you can sort of, it really feels like a true family dynamic. And then, of course, you've got Dick reconnecting with this character from his past. And even that has a little, like, because it's sort of related to his time in the circus, there's a little bit of family energy with that. Like, this is a sister-like character to him. So I would say that runs really strongly through the episode, at least from my perspective. And they also, I would say, more than most episodes of the show so far, really sort of bring back that tension between Batman and Nightwing, Dick Grayson. And of course, they're going to dive more into depth of this before the series concludes, but they've only sort of like teased it a little bit here and there. Whereas I feel like this episode in particular, we see a lot of that in some subtle ways and some not so subtle ways.
I think you're onto something, and I think I'll just bring a bit of the conversation you and I had off mic into the show, because I think it's something we're going to be paying attention to now more, that we kind of had this realization. I am not the biggest fan of the tension between Batman and Nightwing, partly because I don't like that as sort of a baseline character interaction for them. And because this show has such a relatively limited scope, and we never hear from any of Batman's family once we get into like the Justice League era, this kind of becomes the thing, right? This is the defining thing. And what I'm coming to realize is, you're right, they don't hit it as hard on New Batman Adventures as you and I seem to remember them doing. And I have a suspicion that now they definitely have some episodes coming up where they bang that drum hard, where eyes are on that prize. But I think what's interesting, you and I are remembering that because it's such a massive part of Batman Beyond. And once they decided that was going to be a big part of Batman Beyond, I feel like they came back here and maybe tried to sprinkle it around after the fact a little bit on New Batman Adventures. And so it comes across to me as being like really inconsistent, right? Like, I love seeing the family together 100%, but let's look at how Batman and Nightwing work together and how petty and unpleasant Batman is to him, when the last time we really saw them working together, they were actually running a scam on Tim and Selina. Like, they were the two heads that came together to come up with this much bigger, more nuanced plan where they pretended to be at each other's throats more. And then here we are the next time we see them, and Batman's like, oh, you should work on your stealth skills. Say hi to your son. What is wrong with you? Honestly, right? So we're going to keep an eye on that, because I don't love it as a baseline. And I'm coming to realize it's Batman Beyond's fault 100% that it becomes the baseline, because they don't hit it as hard in NBA as I remember. I think my memory's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, well, you're not wrong, but I will say, again, we have episodes coming up, and I did really like this idea. So, for example, one of the more subtle ways they sort of lay out the tension between the two is that every time Dick sees Batman one-on-one, not the group setting, when it's a one-on-one conversation, Batman is almost exclusively in his Batman silhouette, whereas Dick is not. And I'm like, ooh, that is... If that's intentional, I think it is, because it's a little too... but I think that's really, really clever to show that, to him, Batman is this shadowy figure who he just can't connect with, you know? I think that's a really nice touch.
Or coming at it from the other direction, Bruce is purposefully holding himself at arm's length and aloof from this young man that he's not sure how to deal with, right? Like, you can get it from either direction, depending on how you want to read the scene. Like, is it from Dick's perspective or from Bruce's perspective? It works differently either way. I am with you. I want to believe that that's intentional. I'm not sure that I believe that it is, because again, there's so much of just like, they're so inconsistent with this relationship. But I want it to be purposeful, because that shows a level of thought that they brought to the approach that I just have not been able to give them credit for up till now.
I'll give them benefit of the doubt. I think that's an artistic choice for them to do it that way. Multiple scenes, not just one scene. If it was just one scene, I would say, okay, maybe it's just happenstance. But they do it a couple times.
That's a fair cop. You're right. You're onto that. I'm also going to agree with you about the big brother, little brother energy. Seeing Dick and Tim together is really good for me in this episode. I really like it. Mostly because it nods towards the amazing relationship between Dick and Tim that was going on in the comic books throughout the 90s and into the 2010s, honestly. We never really get to that point on New Batman Adventures, partly, I think, because they're doing that estranged family thing. Also, partly because the age difference is so much bigger on this show than comic book Tim. But it is really nice. It does my heart good to see them like doing brotherly stuff, because it reminds me of a time when DC Comics knew better what it was doing with the Bat family in the comic books too.
For sure. Okay, so Joshua, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't have a lot to say about this episode outside of what we've already hit on. What I will say is, it is interesting to me that this followed Critters, at least on HBO Max, and as far as we can tell, the airing order. And the reason I say this is because, and I've already said this many times on past episodes of the show, we were just in a really different headspace about what was a big social issue in the 90s versus where we were not too long afterwards, once we hit 9/11 in 2001. And as I recall, this is really the early 90s in particular is sort of the rise, not to say it didn't exist before, but it is sort of the rise in popularity of like the Greenpeace movement, environmentalist movements. And a part of that is the animal rights activist movements as well. Again, Absolutely. This is not, this is all based off of memory. So again, listeners, you can all point your fingers and say you're totally wrong. But again, these were things that existed and grew in popularity and were sort of like heightened in the conversation. So I just think it's interesting that back-to-back episodes are dealing with animals as sort of the bad guys, and also the way that essentially the people who are using the animals are abusing them in a certain light to defeat justice. It's just interesting. I don't feel like we see that as often these days.
No, I think you're right. I think you're really onto something there. Environmentalism, and then kind of under that umbrella, the animal rights, was definitely a thing that existed before the 90s, but really ramped up. I mean, if nothing else, let's take a look at how many cartoon series cropped up during the 90s whose entire purpose was doing environmental stuff. Of course, we have the extremely famous Captain Planet, but I'll point out to you that there was also a Swamp Thing cartoon that was created whose whole point was basically environmentalism, So I think you're onto something there. And it is really interesting to take a look at how both of these episodes say the human beings are the problem, not the animals, right? So I don't know if that's a consistent message that we're going to see throughout the DC animated universe, but it is one that's a hot topic as far as like right in this moment of creating these episodes.
I mean, and how can you forget the Wild Thornberrys, guys? I mean, from the 90s. I mean, it was animal rights like on the nose. Anyway, great show.
You're
I
right.
love that show,
You're
by
right.
The way. By the way, that's just yeah. It was a whole bunch of shows. Sorry, just to tack on to that. I think it was an interesting conversation, and it seeped its way into Batman the Animated Series and the new Batman Adventures.
So I do have a couple of other things that I want to point out, not because they're particularly clever or deep, but they're a little bit of comic book Easter eggs that I thought you might enjoy. Okay?
I love Easter eggs, Joshua.
Miranda Kane. Now, the last name Kane being attached to a circus near Gotham in the DC universe cannot be an accident. Cannot be an accident.
Nope.
So, the original Batwoman, her name was Kathy Kane. And she was an ex-stunt woman and circus performer. So maybe this is just a bunch of nerds nodding towards comic book stuff. I don't believe for a second that they were actually laying track for a Batwoman at this point, or even a Nightwing version of Batwoman, since she's got more of a connection to Dick than to Bruce. But let me just make it clear, friends, if you hear the name Kane at a circus near Gotham, it's not an accident. That's on purpose.
Quick follow-up question. Any relationship to Solomon Kane?
No, not that I know of. And in fact, now they have established that the current Batwoman, whose last name is also Kane, is Bruce's cousin. So like the Kanes were another extremely wealthy family, and Bruce's mom's maiden name may have been Kane, right? So that's what they're doing now. That's all very new, and both of those Batwomen exist, and both of them are named Kane, and they never bother to explain their connection. I love it. The other, maybe not Easter egg. This one, I'm not going to plant my flag and declare an Easter egg. But at one point, there is this really obvious line. It really stood out to me where the Mad Hatter says, "And now I am the ringmaster." Across the street at Marvel Comics, they have an entire circus of crime. I love the circus of crime. I think a circus of crime is a brilliant idea. I am literally going to write things in the near future that have a circus in them just so I can have a circus of crime. Like, that's it. I love this idea so much. And the ringmaster, that's actually his like supervillain nom de guerre, is a hypnotist. Also a person who does mind control, although in a different way than the Mad Hatter. And it just made me wonder if that was another nerd in the room going, yeah, we read Marvel Comics too.
Well, Joshua, I have to shout out my favorite little Easter eggs, or not really Easter eggs, just kind of like fun tidbits. Firstly, we get to see Batman wielding a sword. How often do we see that happen? Not very often. I love it. Especially
every time.
Every time. I mean, especially to see him when he's not fighting Ra's al Ghul. I mean,
right.
is a night. I mean, seeing it in a circus, never would have saw that one coming. One, and I just have to close out my thoughts here by begging the question. Want some jam with your toast, Batman? Actual line from this episode.
I love that. I love that line so much. If I recall, that's the line that the Hatter says when the Flame Eater comes out and is blowing fire at Batman.
That is correct. It is correct.
Not the most inspired wisecrack, but man, I don't hate it. I do not hate it.
The delivery, the secret sauce is in the line delivery, Joshua, because it's just priceless.
100%. That's a good one. All right, Caleb, let's assume that people tuned in to Animal Act and then said, boy, I didn't enjoy that very much. What should I read or watch or play or experience that would be like that, but actually enjoyable?
All right, Joshua. So I had to sit and think long and hard about this one, and I hope that I have not already made this alternate media recommendation at some point. I often recommend this movie, so I'm going to just throw it out there. And my recommendation is Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys. I've likely recommended it at some point in the almost 100 episodes of the show we've done so far. And what I will say, the reason I am recommending it is because it's somewhat of a spoiler. But essentially, and the premise of the movie is that there was a virus that came through and wiped out most of civilization. And they believe it was done by a group of animal rights activists who freed a bunch of wild animals from the zoo to spread the disease. And they were called the Army of the 12 Monkeys. It's got some really cool imagery of Bruce Willis walking around a desolate streets of, I think it's New York, or LA, one of the two major cities, where it's all apocalyptic looking, and the only thing you see is a bunch of animals walking around, and the animals have sort of taken over the planet as they see it. Again, there's a little more to it than that, but for some reason, the idea of, the animals are the villains, but not actually, kind of came to mind when watching this episode. So if you want a better story that leads with the animals are the bad guys, but not really, watch Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys. It's a great time travel romp. If you've never seen it before, I do highly recommend. Joshua, what about you?
I'm going to break my little rule of thumb against just suggesting other superhero media again, because one part of this episode that you and I really liked, but then they did almost nothing with, was Dick's connection to Haley's circus, right? Like that's where he grew up, and he should have more than friends there, right? Like that's family. And there's too much going on in this episode for that. So fine. But it does bring to mind for me another episode of superhero animation that takes Dick's connection to Haley's circus and just squeezes all the pathos out of it that you can imagine. And that is the 24th episode of the first season of Young Justice. It's called Performance, and it is set up around the idea of Dick Grayson as Robin taking the team, the Young Justice team, off book, like even further off book than they usually are, to look at some crimes that he has a particular interest in. And this is also a little bit of a spoiler, but if you know anything about Robin, you were going to see it coming when you watch the episode. What you come to find out is it's Haley's circus, and that Haley's circus is being framed for these crimes. And Robin is like, by God, me and my squad are going to go over there and we're going to prove that it's not Haley's circus because I won't have it. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I mean, honestly, most of the emotional beats of Young Justice hit better and harder than most of the emotional beats from the DCAU. Not all of them, but most of them. Okay. And that episode in particular really plays up Dick's connection, his childhood connection to Haley's circus. I really recommend it. That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk and I'm at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is animated discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
I'm the editor-in-chief and a contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We also have a podcast called The Cinematic Schematic. We publish in-depth essays as well as the podcast on all types of films, and you can find all of those articles and the podcast at thecinematropolis.com.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And of course, the links to the Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are all very easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about action figures of Superman the Animated Series.
We'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.